Waiting for the box around me. There it is. It's Squale. Good evening. Welcome all. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. It is with great respect and humility that we honor and acknowledge and honor the lands of the Snuneymuxw people. The Snuneymuxw people maintain their profound, unique, and spiritual connection to the land through ageless traditions, teaching, stewardship, and expressions of reciprocity. I'd like to also acknowledge that some of our attendees at tonight's meeting are attending at other parts of our territory, be it Sinawas or Snaminas, and these are also parts of our district, and we welcome all of you tonight. My first thing to do is check, do we have any additions, deletions, or changes in order to tonight's agenda? And we can just use the chat, or you can pop on your camera if you need my attention to let me know of a change in order or anything. Okay, seeing none, I'd seek a motion to accept the agenda as presented.
So moved.
So moved by Mark, and then I saw Greg right after that, so seconded by Greg. Anyone opposed to accepting the agenda as presented, just put it in the chat. I'll give you about 30 seconds. Seeing no opposition, the agenda is accepted as presented. All right, and now item 6, approval of the minutes. That the minutes of the Business Committee meeting held September 13th, 2023 be approved.
Again moved.
Moved by Mark, seconded by...
I'll second it.
Thank you, Naomi. All right, anyone opposed to accepting the minutes as presented? Okay, minutes are approved. We have no presentations tonight. Item 8 is our senior staff reports, 8.1. Our first report will be from Mark Quarles, our Secretary Treasurer, and Jackie Poulin, our Assistant Superintendent, regarding the Feeding Futures Fund. I will turn it over to you, Mark and Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to express appreciation for Assistant Superintendent Poulin joining us this evening to go over the first 2 items. And so thankfully we put them at the front so she can take off right afterwards. But the first item to present to the board is just a brief update on the Feeding Futures Fund. So as you'll recall, this is the fund that the ministry instituted in the last budget to support feeding our students at school. So the year before last fiscal, we had the Student Affordability Fund, which was just a generic pot of dollars to support a variety of in kind of inflationary fighting, supporting food, supporting purchases for schools, supporting families generally, got groceries, etc. This year is different in the sense that it's focused solely on feeding the students in their schools. And so obviously a large sum of dollars and a very large project to go with it. So at the secondary level, not a ton of change, as you will see. So we already had been feeding a number of students, and so we'll be supporting that through increased funding for the costs of food, as well as the school would be able to use some of that funds to support students that can't afford the food. At Cedar, you'll see we've added a little additional staffing in addition to the money to actually get the food. So we'll see, that'll be interesting to see how that expands given the size of the school. And then finally at Wellington, unfortunately at Wellington, the facilities there at this time are not in a shape that we could replicate what's happening at Barsby or Dover or ND. And so what we're looking at doing, and it's not finalized yet, is having a contractor of some sort. We work with them with the funding available to support food program slash supports for kids that can't afford the funds. So there'd likely be a charge. We're not quite finalized that yet. And then just to be clear, though, we are applying for infrastructure dollars to be able to expand Wellington, probably to look more like what the typical secondary program looks like in future years. Not a final decision as of yet, but that's where we're at with the secondaries. We have received funding from the Ministry of Education to expand the Woodlands site, and so we will be contracting with the Nanaimo Ladysmith Schools Foundation to run the bulk of the program, particularly for elementary. And Ms. Poulin is here to comment on how it's rolled out so far, because it has rolled out now, but in a minor form, and answer any questions. So maybe Jackie, if you want to talk a little bit about where we're at, and then we can answer some questions.
Thanks, Mark. So at the elementary level, the Nanaimo Ladysmith Schools Foundation has begun to provide pre-made breakfast and lunch items to some of our elementary schools. Because it's just taking some time to get the infrastructure set up. We've started it with 3 elementary schools who started to receive breakfast and lunch deliveries. That was Georgia Ave Elementary, Fairview, and Park Ave. We really wanted to start it small so that we could make sure that the systems we needed to have in place and the order forms and how the deliveries were going to work smoothly, with the intent to increase schools quite quickly. So by next week, we're already adding another 2 to 3 schools. And then as we can have the infrastructure and as things are working, we'll be increasing with the goal to have all of our schools being able to do pre-orders of breakfast and lunch items. With the breakfast and lunch items, they order the full breakfast or full lunch, but they're packaged individually so that when they do get to the schools, the students can select what they might want to take. So there's reducing waste, working through delivery, working through preparation of it, working through packaging that doesn't have too much waste, and trying to be environmentally sound as well. So we're just working through a variety of structures and systems, but the feedback that's come from schools that have already had it is overwhelmingly positive, in the sense that the food is arriving and being able to be handed out to students rather than taking the time at the school sites by school site staff to do it.
Can I jump in with a question? Thank you. In terms of numbers, and the reason I'm asking this is I had a conversation with someone from another district who was concerned that they didn't necessarily understand the program, in the sense that they were being told that the ministry wants us providing meals to every student in every school. And I said, I don't think that's actually the intent. I think the intent is only for the students who need it. And the person is, well, how that what they were told was the reason that that district was interpreting that way is they didn't know a way to do it without creating a stigma for the students who needed it. Can you address that issue a bit? And so both because I think people are wondering, and because I'm going to share the information with my person who I had the conversation with.
We do provide it for students who demonstrate a need. Sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's because students just forgot their lunch. And so it might change from day to day. And each school sets it up differently, but we do set it up where students can come either to a central location, or they can come to a cart and they can pre-package it up and brown bag it and take it back and put it into their backpack, so no other students even see. In some schools, there are so many students who are accessing it, it's not an issue, but it's always done discreetly and privately so that students can access it as they need.
And at the secondary level, we will, particularly in the schools with the kind of the programs that are already there, where they're actually paying for the service, it will be done in a similar way, except for money is going to continue to fight inflation for the food costs, but as well as to support the school in ensuring that kids are not going to be excluded because of lack of affordability. And so that's what will happen there. And a similar thing will happen at Wellington in the kind of interim program that I mentioned as well. I'm not aware of a directive that it's supposed to be for everyone, because I'm not sure how achievable that would be.
Exactly, that was my understanding as well.
Given. And frankly, the setup that we've got has kind of provided we anticipate to provide far more food than alternative, because the foundation gets so many donations and was already providing food in the first place. So we're going further with the amount, when the program is kind of fleshed out, it's going to go further than just the pot of dollars that we would have been able to support.
Okay. All right. Before I see if there's other questions, was there anything that, before I jumped in with my question, was there anything else you wanted to add before I take further questions? No? Okay. I see a question from Greg.
Yes, thank you, Tanya, through you to staff. This is a good news story, obviously. Anytime we can provide food to kids in need, that's amazing. My question has to do with Woodlands. And I'm wondering, given the fact that this is a question, because given that this is an old facility with a somewhat uncertain future, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the risks of investing into the facility in the long term, and does it have any impact on, is what we're doing movable if for whatever reason and that we need to do something else with that land?
So the answer to that is the vast majority of it luckily is movable. So there's going to be some plumbing changes that are going to be required. Obviously, the investment in actual bodies to move things costs money that's not going to be able to get back. But no, we're talking fridges, we're talking tables, we're talking preparatory areas is the vast majority. Jackie, I would say about 75% of the investment is going to be in stuff.
Yes.
Rather chattels rather than fixed, or rather than items that can't move.
Okay, no, that's good, because I just wasn't quite sure, given that we don't know what the future of that facility looks like, if it would make a lot of sense to make major investments into things that weren't movable. But yes, this is good news. Thank you.
Had to unmute for a moment. Thank you. All right. So, all right, Mark, are you then ready for me to move on to 8.2?
I think I see Chantel with a question.
Oh, sorry, Chantel. I did see your question and I completely lost it.
All good.
My apologies.
Thank you, Tanya. My question is, I hear a lot from families. They're wondering how's this working? How do I get involved? How do I tell my kid? And stuff like that. Because sometimes they miss what the school has been sending out. It just happens, right? What do we tell families who are in some of these schools and the future schools when they ask, like, how do I get my kid involved? They just say, go to the principal and let them know. How do we inform? Because any way that we can get the message out to families that this is here for those in need is great. And so I consider this one of the opportunities to get the word out for families, because I know there's a lot of stress on families right now. So
at the elementary level, it would be the classroom teacher more than likely. So the classroom teacher would recognize, actually, because the students eat under the supervision of the classroom teacher. So they would recognize when a child either, didn't have a breakfast and the child was expressing being hungry, or didn't have a lunch, and they'd be able to say, hey, we can provide for you here. So that's where a lot of the information is going to come, or classroom teachers or the principal and vice principal may reach out to the family and say, we've noticed, is it okay if we provide breakfast or lunch? So it's going to be a lot of direct connection at the elementary level.
Okay, great. And so there's nothing stopping the parent from reaching out to the teacher to say, hey,
not at all.
Things are really, really tough. What can you do? Okay,
absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. With perhaps, if I could add, Chair, with the caveat that it's going to be some time until we've reached all elementary schools because of that infrastructure need.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's rolled out really fast as it is. So that's really fantastic to hear that 2 more are coming online next week. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for all your hard work.
Yes, absolutely. Before I just do we have any other questions on this topic before we move on to the next one? Okay. Seeing none, I also want to reiterate what Chantel just said. I'm incredibly impressed by the work that's happened with this, getting this program up and running. I know how much it means to all of our kids and all of our schools. I'm particularly had relationships with Georgia in the past and a few of these pilot schools, and I know what a huge difference it makes. So I'm extremely, I raise my hands to all of you and in the work you're doing to get this running so smoothly and efficiently and respectfully. So Heichka. So now Mark and Jackie, I will ask you to move on to 8.2, which is Admin Procedure 333, field trips.
Great, thanks, Chair. And so here's another example where we had an administrative procedure that didn't quite align with our practice and in fact didn't align with our online field trip applications. And so we've been working diligently to try to update this, also with the feedback of our principals and teachers who are concerned about the bulkiness of the requirements and the alignment and clarity. And so we've had an elementary school principal as well as secondary principal work through this with the eyes of schools protection at the last iteration and address some concerns from our ISC program as well. So a couple of highlights. One, obviously, we're well aware of the district's alignment with the district inclusion policy with respect to field trips. And so that's now reflected in the AP. And then I note again that the redundancies, the repetitive nature, we're hoping that the document, while still long, it now has cut out most of that repetition. And so that's really the main kind of changes. They're not going to feel a lot of difference in the way that we run field trips as far as I'm aware. And I'll ask Jackie to comment in just one moment. The only other thing, and appreciate a couple of questions being sent in advance so we'd have a chance to look, just to point out that there's the requirement, particularly if we're going to be going across the border, whether it's United States or Europe or wherever, that we put in the policy or AP for a passport. And so we are aware that you can be under the age of 15 and have other documents to be able to cross the border. We've made the purposeful decision to maintain the status quo of requiring a passport still. The reason for that is there's a couple of reasons. One is that we do not have cross-border curricular field trips. So these are voluntary. We shouldn't be having that in that circumstance. So it's voluntary in nature. The second piece is that it really makes it a bit easier to organize, as well as prevents concerns at the border. We are worried about, passport has the photo, it has all of that, whereas the other documents might not. And the last concern that we had was there are exceptions, of course, for people under 15 for land and sea, but if we had an emergency, say you're in Portland for whatever you're in Portland for, and we need to fly you home for some reason, well, and you didn't have your passport, raises an entirely new concern. So that's just and again, thank you in advance for that concern being raised, but that was the thinking behind that particular provision. So very happy. We hope the system appreciates, well, it's still 7 pages long. It's many pages shorter than it was before. And perhaps before questions, I could just see if Jackie wanted to add anything.
No, I think you pretty much covered it. It really was meant to just streamline it. There was a lot of times where things were repeated, and to make sure that it did align directly with the online request application process that teachers have to go through to make sure that the language were complementary and were in alignment with each other.
And one last thing perhaps I can add is that this is an area, this is one that we've been talking about with the policy committee about. Sometimes we read APs that don't have necessarily a corresponding policy. And of course, the superintendent can create APs, has been delegated authority in a variety of ways. But when we look at this AP, the opening statement is more of a policy statement in a way, and it's, I think, one of those ones that was probably a policy or a mixture at some point that just got fully moved into AP, and we're contemplating perhaps a lead policy that the AP ultimately is the stem from, and then if that happens, we just adjust the AP at that time.
All right. I see Mark Robinson with a question and a comment.
Thanks, Tanya. And Jackie and Mark, thank you so much for this. It's a good update. Thanks for raising some of the concerns revolving the passports. I see it from a safety lens, so that's appropriate with regards to needing that passport in hand in case you need to get back home. We've seen that in the past where students have had to come home quickly. And we live in a world where we don't know what's going to happen. I have a question regarding the use of alcohol and illicit drugs on field trips. I know that's not so much of an issue. I know once every 10 years or 5 years it might happen, but I guess my question revolves around vaping products and tobacco products. I had a look through the AP and I couldn't quite see what I was looking for. Do we have a policy on with students using vaping products, tobacco?
Sure. So perhaps I can respond, Chair. And so if you look under, it's on page 16 of the agenda or page 5 of the draft AP under number 29. So it states the use of alcohol, cannabis, or illegal substances shall be prohibited for all students, staff, and chaperones involved at all times during a field trip, regardless of age requirements in field trip jurisdiction. So there's a typo that we're just going to fix in that. Thank you. But the thinking behind that is that they are illegal in the sense that you can't vape or smoke. Our students can't due to age. So we think that covers it. However, you know, we may have a chaperone that does vape or smoke. We would anticipate that wouldn't be happening around a student, but it's not an omission by, like, it's a purposeful omission in the sense that it would be, I think, difficult to ask someone that's addicted to a product like that is legal to not partake as long as it's done respectfully. And it's not spelled out that they can't do it in front of kids, etc., because I think that common sense, we're hoping common sense fills the void there. So that was the thinking.
Right. No, that's a good point, Mark. Just following up on that, if I may, Tanya. Sometimes we have a situation where students might go to jurisdictions where the product will be legal in that jurisdiction. For example, in France, where maybe table wines or beers at a younger age might be legal, whereas here it wouldn't be. Does this policy reflect that and our wishes for them to sort of not partake?
So on alcohol, it absolutely does, because it's saying whether you're a student or a chaperone, that's no go, because that's going to impact your ability to chaperone, or it's illegal, or we say you can't, even if it's theoretically illegal. I guess if there was a gap, and again, we're hoping common sense would prevail, is if you go to a jurisdiction where vaping is 18 or 16 or something like that, and you happen to be 16 or 18, perhaps it doesn't apply. But we would just tell a student you're not able to do that. So we could add that one gap, but we thought, are we going to make it lengthier for that one off when we would expect that our teachers and our chaperones would be able to deal with that? And so we had a bit of a chat, and we thought maybe we'll leave it and cross the bridge if it comes up.
Right. Super. Thank you so much, Jackie and Mark. Thank you. Thank you, Tanya.
You're welcome, Mark. And next on the list, I see Chantel, and then Naomi has a comment.
Hello, through you, Chair, to Jackie or Mark. I love that you added the inclusion policy. I think that really solidifies, what we do here in this district. I think it's great. I just want a little bit of clarity. I'm curious, because it says here, a plan must be in place to support students who have special needs and or behavioral challenges who may require specific safety considerations. What are we doing as a district to ensure that staff have access to extra staffing, to ensure that those supports are in place for those students? Is there a process? Is there kind of a way that they go about doing that? Because it's not part of the AP, so I'm just wondering if there's something else included with this that helps them get that extra support for those students.
I can start there, Mark, if you'd like.
Yeah, it's above my pay grade. Thanks, Jackie.
So at the school level, when there is a field trip that's happening and they're going to need some additional support on that field trip, the first step, of course, would be to have the conversation with their school-based principal and vice principal to see whether or not they have the support already in their classroom, whether it be an EA or child and family support worker or somebody else that can go with them on that field trip. And so you work with them and you do that. If they're doing a larger field trip and they're feeling that they don't have enough to cover that, then they would reach out to their assistant superintendent and we would work through it case by case. When it comes to transportation, there actually is right in the online field trip application process that teachers have to do. If they have a student who will need an accessible bus, then that prompts right in the ask, and it automatically goes to transportation, and indicating that they need an accessible bus for a student. So that's part of the actual online field trip process. So it really is dealt with in-house first, and then up to us if they need more.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Jackie. I appreciate it a lot.
Sorry, guys, my mouse is being, oh, she's gone. I was going to see if she had a follow-up, but she does not. Naomi.
I just want to say thank you for streamlining it. I was lucky enough to be able to do the online one in 219, my last year in the district working there. And man, the questions were redundant. And it took forever to get that form filled out just to go on a field trip to Ladysmith for the Indigenous Games. So I really appreciate the work that you've done, Jackie. And I mean, that's just awesome. And yeah, and I know that I took a group of students to Europe in 2016. And I think we were just before the Paris or the France attack, terrorist attack or whatever. And back then, we didn't have any district forms for international field trips. So myself and my other colleague, I remember I contacted Scott and he was like, no, we don't have an international form. So we actually made our own. I'm sure that we missed some things or whatever. So it's really glad to see that you've got an all-encompassing forms like for international, for, you know, domestic. It's awesome. Keep up the good work.
Absolutely. Are there any other questions or comments before I just ask a question? Seeing none, I was just wanting to follow up, Mark, on what you said earlier about the preamble, the early part of the AP and how that it might fit into a policy. What would be are you thinking? I would like to see an actual policy, but my question is it better to wait and leave it as something that could be integrated into a currently existing policy, like our inclusion policy, in a review of that inclusion policy?
Well, I think responsibly, the policy committee probably will talk about whether it fits there, because I think it's got so many different aspects that it might reference the inclusion policy, might reference risk management, what that looks like at the end of the day, that it's one of those ones that's significant enough and comes up often enough in our community's kind of knowledge that it may warrant its own, like may not. We're just throwing the idea out there, though, that again, at the beginning of it, we've just imported what is a policy statement, not a procedure at the beginning of it. And so we're maintaining it because it's the reality. It's just pointing out the kind of cognitive dissonance of a procedure that says these are all the things you shall do, but here's the philosophy of it behind it, which is the board giving us the kind of impetus to create it. So I think it's an open discussion.
Okay, so let me rephrase my question. It would be premature to be writing a motion requesting that the policy committee look at this matter because it's already in your frame of I can't think of the word, but you're thinking about it already. It's already in your mind. Yeah,
there's a few of them that are kind of really clear examples of where we would want to create that. So I don't think a motion would be necessary at this time. But
okay. Thank you. All right, I see no other comments or questions. So I want to thank you, Jackie, for joining us here tonight and staying a little late on after what I'm sure has been a long day. So I'm now going to leave it to you to decide if you wish to stay and listen to the last number of items. And I'm going to move us on to 8.3. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. But Jackie, before you go, could you just, you already pressed exit? Okay. Sorry. No, could you just remind everyone, I just want to express appreciation for who your partner in redrafting this was.
Absolutely. So yes, a huge thank you to Stephen Epp, who worked quite closely with me working through this. So a huge thank you to him.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Heichka.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Enjoy your night. All
Okay,
right,
so
8.3.
the next item is some pretty good news for our school district, I will say. So I am going to start by reading the conclusion to this enrollment memo, which states, overall, our district is in a sweet spot for enrollment growth. The growth is sufficient enough to support inflationary impacts while not being too excessive that space, with a few exceptions, is at a critical point. So we're in that Goldilocks zone for growth, and I'm hoping that we could continue this for many years to come. I think that would be very good for the district if we could maintain this level of growth. So you will recall we came up with preliminary estimates for our bricks and mortar as well as our programs last January, which is the basis for our budget. Each year we do tell the board that we're doing it on a relatively conservative basis. Last year, though, we were too optimistic and we missed from our budgeted numbers. This year, we're, I guess, back to the way it was in previous years, in that we've actually exceeded our targets for headcount as well as FTE. So I've laid out headcount just so everyone can get a sense. So headcount, of course, is different than FTEs. So at a high school, if I'm taking 8 out of 8 courses, I'm going to be a 1.0 and we'll get the full funding. If I'm 4 out of 8 courses, I'm a 0.5 FTE and we're going to get half funding for that student. So that it's important in the sense that we don't have as much funding, but that doesn't necessarily mean we don't have the student there physically in the school. So there's you keep headcount in mind because it does have an infrastructure impact. But really, from an FTE perspective, is important. And sorry, the one last piece of the headcount to be aware of is that, so you'll see we're up 296 headcount from previous year and 331 from our estimates. Really important to note, though, a lot of that is cross-enrolled students. So I'm a student at Wellington. I'm taking Math 11 online at ICE, and so therefore I'm counted twice in that head count, which is why, again, it's not as useful. But importantly, and perhaps if I could get Karen to open page 21 of the agenda. This is the most impactful for us because there's some very interesting trends that are concerning, and there's some optimism in this document as well. So you will see the top of the page is related to our bricks and mortar schools, and you will see that we're up 54 from last year in our elementaries and up 69 from projection. So that's all new kids we weren't anticipating. And then at the secondary level, we're up 64, again FTE, but actually down overall from our projections in FTE. And you'll see the grade 12 number is really stark. And that, I think, is represented by the fact that we saw a few more, we think, cross-enrolled students taking more courses at ICE, and therefore not as much FTE in our secondary schools. So when you look at this trend line, though, you'll be very concerned, extremely concerned to see our KFTE. So KFTE down 78, we were anticipating a decline, but down 37 from where we thought we were going to be. So what this is telling us, and it's a trend we were aware of, is that people are not having babies, that Nanaimo, Ladysmith, kind of current citizens are not having the babies at the level that they were having 5 years before that. If this trend was to bear out, well, you can times 78 times 13, and we're going to have a serious problem in a few years' time. But the counter trend, of course, is that we're seeing immigration levels at very significant levels. And so that's why we're beating in 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 10, like those are big numbers. And we know this is immigration because we can see, as an example, Fairview has just blasted past our estimates. And so in more traditional neighborhoods where there might not be the housing to support immigrant populations, Chase River, Cinnabar have missed in a significant way as well. And so these are the things we're watching. And so Karen, if you could just scroll to the bottom. So the magic number at the end is, you'll see we're up 132 or 133 FTE year over year, and which is 96 above estimates. So that's really good news for us. And so that's 96 kids that were not previously budgeted from a revenue perspective. But as noted, as they arrive and we need new classrooms, we need more supports for these kids, it's typically going to flow immediately. There are some additional dollars that do support other inflationary costs, et cetera, associated with these kids. And then Karen, if you go to the next page. So here is the other important number, and you'll see we are beating our estimates in unique student supplements significantly as well, which is driving a great deal of revenue. Now, there's an unfortunate little asterisk here, is if this had to be last year or the year before that, we'd be looking at making significant investments with this additional revenues. However, we've adjusted our model to front end load more supports to students with diverse abilities and disabilities that under these supplements, that much of these revenues have already been expended to be able to support them. And so, for instance, the inclusive learning area has been able to, put more of that funding out in spring. We heard a lot of concerns about that in the past. So it's not all new money. Much of it has been used. Some of it will still flow though. So again, great news with a couple of concerns. And obviously we have some increasing complexity, which we're watching, and we'll be coming to the board. You'll see all these changes reflected in our amended annual in January. But happy to answer any questions, and noted that we will be digging deeper into the Ks to see if there's a dynamic that we can understand a little bit further, but we do believe it is a demographic driven issue.
Do we have any questions for Mark? Okay, seeing none, I do have. Oh, no, I'll let Chantel go first.
Okay, sorry. I always have questions, so I'm going to tell that to everybody right now. I think we all know that now. This is a way for me to process, but also this is a genuine curiosity when it comes to our online learning, our ICE, as we see that there have been an increase in attendance. But the way that I understand ICE is that they're kind of their cycle is different, right? So it changes at different times than the actual regular school year. I'm wondering, what are we doing to make sure that we have proper staffing at the right times because of this change in an odd time of the year, right? So it doesn't kind of go with the budget flow. It sort of goes a little bit differently. What do we do as a district for that?
Yeah, so we do start in spring by estimating what we're looking at, K to 9 and 10 to 12. And so you'll see 32 additional FTE, although we're in 12 in K to 9. So what we'll do is obviously take that staffing, and just like a bricks and mortar school, if additional staffing is required, there's no specific ratios required for the ICE so there's some flexibility there. However, there's reasonable workloads. And so what we do is we have an internal staff and space committee is what we call it. And then what'll happen is that the ask will end up coming from the school. Then we will review those caseloads and add as need be. Unfortunately, it's not perfect in the sense that we've overstaffed that program significantly since the beginning of COVID, just because what are the numbers going to be on a day-to-day basis, and that's impacted our supports for other areas. And so sometimes there is a bit of a lag effect to impact, and so all of a sudden you're going to add staffing and you got to go hire someone that's maybe not a pro in that area. That certainly does happen, but we're watching it kind of day-to-day basis, just like we would a bricks and mortar school.
Great, thank you so much. No follow-up.
And no follow-up? Okay, any other questions before I throw out one or two? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to throw one out. You guys jump in if you also have one. So I have two interrelated questions, maybe. Let's suppose I'm a parent and something happens with my child, and for whatever reason, I decide that I want to put my child in a learn at home type program, but I don't choose ICE, I choose NIDES. There's no way that we don't necessarily find out why that student is no longer in our system, or do records get transferred so that we can find that out? Like, do we have a way of tracking that?
We do release records to the school district that's taking the student, yes.
So that we would know for those children. But I suppose, connecting to that, in terms of kindergartners, if the issue is maybe not so much that we just don't have any as many in our community as we'd hoped, but they've simply chosen to go to Montessori or go to the Christian school or go to Aspen Grove, we don't really have a way of knowing that, do we? Or do we?
Well, certainly with respect to homeschool, we do, because we would expect them to still register so we can track them. We don't have a direct line to understand how many kids. So for instance, the Montessori has just expanded in a nice new facility. We don't know quite the impact of that yet. And perhaps I'll just check with Miss Sutton whether she's got a tool that she's magic with this stuff. So I'll just give her a chance to see if she might want to add to that.
Through the chair, no, she's not magic. But I would say that when it comes to kindergarten, that is a complexity that we can't be tracking because, of course, they're not registering with us. So they could be registering anywhere. Once they're in our system, then we can see where they are shifting to and fro. Even if they are moving out of province, we can capture that data. It's not readily, easily available to just create a report. It's some work to put it together, but we do have that information available. But kindergarten is the complexity as to what choices parents are making for their kids into the system. If they're choosing something other than NLPS, we will lack that information.
Okay, I just always wonder about that. Thank you. All right. Anybody else with a question? Thank you for that, Tana. And you may not be magic, but you're pretty fantastic. All right, I just want to get back to my agenda because I scrolled down to look at your graphs because it was easier for me. All right, 8.4, Secretary Treasurer Walsh, Mark, regarding Rutherford.
Great. So thank you, Chair. And so tonight, in response to the board's motion of May 24th, that was recommending the reopening of Rutherford, but, kind of accepting that we better see our September numbers before we make a final call. We are satisfied, staff are satisfied now that the numbers are bearing out with respect to the support for the opening of Rutherford. The risks, of course, that are outlined in the memo of the 24th of May are outstanding. So if, enrollment all of a sudden does start to decline, we could be in a position where, we don't meet those numbers and there's an operational dollar impact on the school district. However, we're seeing beats at Frank Ney from an enrollment perspective. We're right in line at Departure Bay. I think we beat at McGurr a little bit. Randerson is right on the line where it needs to be, and that's us even kind of dissuading people from entering. And so So given that the apartment blocks, for instance, at Randerson, the ones that are already open there near the Dodds Furniture are actually producing a fair amount of kids, and there's about to be 4 more that are going to open, and there's a development going next to Randerson that'll be open how many years from now? It's going to produce kids. We think that it is a supportable decision to take the next steps to open it for September 2025 and give us now the time, a significant amount of time, so which will disappear quickly, but about 15 months, sorry, to get it back to the board so it's in place. The boundaries, how the school is going to open, will be to the board by January of 2025 for an opening of September 2025. The one part of the memo, though, that we just want to bring to the board's attention, and I'm sorry, we thought we would just throw data at you, like, so it's available to the public, so it's available to you. We didn't have time to make it as beautiful as we normally do, but to give you some interesting dynamics with respect to other areas of the school district and French immersion. And so what we've seen is essentially our French immersion waitlist dissipate. Now that might not be you get access to the school you want, but we're seeing declines now at Eno in the French immersion program. That might change if we move it to a new facility at Davis. But the big question is Hammond Bay going to do what we wanted it to do, which is take kids from Departure Bay and Nay so they're not going to be overfilled, or is it going to be taking from other French immersion programs, creating additional empty spaces somewhere else? And ironically, and of course this is a planned part right now, is Hammond Bay is actually our emptiest school because we are filling it with a cohort that won't be, it'll be another 5 years until that cohort flows through. So we may want to have a further conversation about whether, or at least to do more work on whether Hammond Bay should be looked at as a dual track option in addition to the Rutherford opening, and maybe dual track. Not recommending that, not as an outcome of this motion. This is to say to the community, yes, Rutherford's going to open. We're going to start those conversations now, so you have plenty of time to plan what you're going to be doing in September 2025. But again, the pressure's there. It'll take 10 portables basically to use in other areas if we need, or just 10 portables offline of the district. It will have an operational dollar impact if that K cohort continues to be problematic. But overall, we think that it's supportable and the recommended motion is there.
All right, I'm seeking a mover to the motion, please. Happy to move the motion. Before we do that, Greg, did you have a question pertaining to the motion or pertaining to Mark's report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. Just a question a little bit more. I was hoping to find out about the school transition working group. Specifically, what role they would play in identifying a potential catchment, and what role the board would play in that process as well.
Sure. So we would envision it being in line with similar working groups created in the past. However, the opposite. I think it's been closure in the past. And so it'd be the exact structure. And perhaps we can move to the next question while I ask Karen if she can just throw an example structure at me so I can respond with specifics.
Yeah,
that's okay.
Okay, so I don't actually have any other questions. I simply have Mark seeking to move the motion. So do you want me to go ahead and do that, or do you want me to just wait? Oh, question from Joe. Joanne Cornthway. Joe, I always pronounce your name poorly. I apologize.
No worries, Chair. Thank you. So my question is for Secretary Treasurer Walsh with regard to the consultation. So I'm assuming after listening to your presentation that there'll be a public consultation process, and just wondering what that will look like. And then sort of further to that, is the reopening a done deal. I was a little bit unsure about that with your statement. Thank you.
So the second question first is, if the board passes this motion, reopening is a done deal. Yes. I raised the issue of the French immersion issue just because we still are gathering some information and numbers and trying to see play out what Hammond Bay looks like, play out what looks like over a period of time, just because it would be we just want to understand the dynamic of that, but that doesn't prevent the opening of Rutherford. So that's, one of the directions in the recommendation is to ensure the long-term viability. So if all of a sudden we can't create a catchment that we truly think is going to support the school, well, maybe there's a programming option that we can support. We can support it. So the consultation, what we look like is when the committee is created, I think the committee will do much of the hard work with parents, with principals, with teachers union, with CUPE, with staff, and then go to consultation at that point. So I think that that's what we look at. Obviously, creating boundaries that both impact kind of as few people as we can, but all those other questions of, is it K-3, is it K-5, is it K-7? Do parents do you want to leave your school in grade 6 to go to that new school? So yes, there'll be, I would assume, fairly significant consultation. Like I think we talked about with the board. I think opening the school can be almost as difficult as closing one.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, I do have it was the consolidation administrative procedure. So this is obviously be the deconsolidation administrative procedure with respect to Greg's question. And the composition of the group in the past was assistant super learning services, finance representative, facilities rep, school principals that were impacted, the PAC chairs, 2 NDTA reps, 2 CUPE reps, trustee zone rep, Aboriginal community rep, so Leaders for Learning rep, regional district representative, and community association representative. I'm not sure we would recommend those folks at this point, but they'd be part of the consultation process. So that's what we would envision. We would envision drafting the boundaries, in addition to potentially, if we were wanting to address programming, to come to the board before going to that formal secondary consultation with respect to what those boundaries actually look like.
All right. So before we get to the motion, I'm going to just quickly ask a quick question. So the 2025, as much as anything, is simply that there's so much work now that needs to be done to prepare this properly that it's not feasible to get it for 2024, and I'm asking because I know we'll hear that in the community, because there's people who would have liked it sooner.
A couple of points. One is that, again, we're supporting all the kids in the portables that in the infrastructure that's already there. And though that Rutherford build out is still just a little bit away from being complete. The other one is that our own AP, which we can override, does say that we need to have our boundaries in place by January, which seems fair if that's registration time for communities. So to do that by January, unlikely to do it right and to do it with consultation. And the last one is the board set aside $600,000 in September. We're going to be coming back to the board to do the same thing to make sure that we're financially protected when it opens, because it's not going to open full. It's unlikely that we're going to just be taking every K-7 in these catchments and moving them into the new school. I maybe that happens, but I see that as relatively unlikely. And so we just need some time to financially prepare.
Fair enough. Thank you. All right. Seeing no further questions at the moment, I'm going to go back to you, Mark, and have you move the motion.
Thanks, Tanya. The business committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, direct that Rutherford Elementary School be reopened as of September 2025, and that staff are directed to create a school transition working group to address issues associated with reopening the facility and provide the board with recommendations with respect to appropriate catchments for Rutherford and the surrounding schools and potential programming, if applicable, to ensure the long-term viability of the school.
All right, I need a seconder, please. Seconded by Greg. Would you like to motivate, Mark?
I suppose very briefly, thanks, Tanya. Rutherford was open, then it was closed. Now it's reopening. I think a lot of people are in the neighborhood are very happy with this time. You know, I'm always a fan of opening schools. I'm not a big fan of closing schools, whether it's the environmental impact of having more opportunities for kids to walk to school, all the way to having a sense of locality with the kids. I think there's a sense of community. So I'm very happy to be making the motion, and I'm very happy that this is something that's on our radar, and hopefully that Rutherford stays open for many years to come. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you, Mark. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I will simply say that I am deeply grateful to see this motion coming forward. I can tell you that it means a lot to a number of people in the community who are still feeling hurt about the closure, and I think that this will go a long way to continuing rebuilding some bridges in our district. I think it will further bring faith to our long-range facilities plan and the commitment this board has made and the previous board has made to meaningful public consultation processes. So I think this is great. I'm extremely grateful to staff for their work in listening to the public and the community and listening to the board and in figuring out a way to come up with some creative ideas on how to bring this forward. So I will be happily and passionately and with great joy voting in favor of this motion, supporting this recommendation, I should say. All right. So having said that, I'm going to call the question because I see no one. Oh, I apologize, Greg. Did you wish to comment as I was pontificating there?
Oh, that's okay. Chair, thank you. So through you, I will be speaking to the motion. I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts. I'm really pleased to see that we'll have a school transition working group, that will have public consultation. It's really important to me to make sure that we're successful in identifying a solution which provides for the long-term viability of this school. Because if there's one thing I can speak to with certainty here is that our community cannot withstand another closure of this facility. And we really have to work hard to get this right. And I have full confidence in our staff and the process that we'll come to a good place. And just happy that we're at this point now where we can take the next step forward. So thank you, staff. Thank you, board. I'm again happy to speak in favor of the motion and will be supporting it. Thank you.
Much more eloquent than myself there. Greg, thank you. Anyone else wish to speak before I call question? Before I call for the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? Or as Chantel, anyone opposed? I don't think anyone's opposed. Mark, you're in favor. I see no one opposed, and I'm going to declare that this motion, this recommendation passes unanimously. Thank you again, staff. Good work. And much appreciated. Sorry, I'm a little emotional. This has been a thing in the back of my mind since my early work, my early time on the board. So this feels very good to me. So now I'm going to move on to 8.5. Mark, again, policy 3.8, transportation.
Thank you, Chair. And so here is some work of the policy committee that I will be representing. And so this is changes to the transportation policy. So they're fairly significant, and in the event that it passes, it goes out to consultation and comes back in the form or close to the form it's in, it will result in some big changes to APs as well. Particularly some, again, that we talked about the field trip, but some movement from AP to policy is what's occurring, and then there'll have to be an alignment that stems from that. In addition, there'll have to be 2 additional APs likely created. So what it's done, what the policy committee talked about is expanding the scope of the transportation policy. And so you'll see the first thing that it's done is it's actually changed, it's recommended to change its name. So transportation to and from school. And this is the idea that we can incorporate, we're not just talking about busing, we're also talking about active transportation, and we're also talking about theoretically parking safety, etc. At schools, things that have come up that we've seen. So often policy change can be a bit of a reaction to what we're hearing and seeing in the community or at our table, and you will see that in this. So the second thing it does specifically outline the types of riders that we have in the school district. So we have, of course, walk limits, and then so there's eligible riders. We have kids that live outside the walk limit or inside the walk limit, I'm sorry, but we've deemed them from a safety concern that we would provide busing. And then there's diverse learners and students with disabilities, and then there's BCT, so the tripartite agreement, which we have agreed to provide certain services to on-reserve students with respect to busing. One important one that I hope is going to be a welcome addition to our policy book is a clarification of authority. So I think you'll recall here a couple of years ago, I came to talk to you and suggest that we were going to remove a bus route at the one going to Frank Ney. And the board said, well, wait a second, don't we need to approve that? And of course, there was no policy that suggested that. So the board made a motion that specifically addressed that bus route, which was fine, but it was a bit confusing because we just were, going with the way that it's written. So now there's a delineation of authority. So the board shall approve this or not approve this. And here's where staff's authority is going to lie with respect to that. So I think that's a useful for our community, but as well as for our board and for staff. Encouragement to work with RDN. So you'll see that we are continuing our struggles with providing bus service. Our department is doing amazing work, but it's hard to get mechanics. It's hard to keep our bus fleet operational. And so, as our city densifies, are there going to be places where we can look and say, well, maybe that route, maybe we have a different need because we certainly are not getting more money, and we're certainly not getting more bus drivers or more mechanics to get more buses. And so maybe we can rely on those folks. At the very least, we're going to work closer to understand the services they provide, etc. And we've already started that work. And then just definitions to align with what we've been doing with our modern policy revisions. And then finally, I will just point out that I just noticed an edit that we need to make on page 51 of the agenda, which is page 4 of 4 of the draft policy, and that's the monitoring method. The monitoring method says internal reports. Well, in fact, on page 3 of 4 of the draft policy, the yearly route review is the monitoring method, and it's right there in the policy, so we'll adjust that. So happy to answer any questions or ask trustees on the policy committee to maybe talk about something I've missed, but it's there. Next steps, of course, if the board passes it, to go and seek comment. And of course, if there's comments tonight, maybe take those into account. And when we come back to the policy committee to walk through whether there's major changes that the board should contemplate or minor changes in passage in when it comes back.
All right, I see Greg seeking to move the motion. Greg, if you want to turn your camera on, do you have it there? You can read it.
I sure do. You bet. The Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, receive the draft revised policy 3.8, transportation, and circulate a notice of motion for 30 days, utilizing the consultation process as per board governance section 1, 2.7, policy development.
All right, now Chantel, I see that you want to make a comment. Before you do that, I need a seconder for the motion.
I can second the motion.
All right, seconded by Chantel. Greg, do you want to motivate?
Sure. So I'll just speak in favor of the motion, and I'd like to thank the policy committee and staff for their work and support on this draft. I'm pleased to see that we are able to address a number of areas of the policy, including the greater clarification and including aspects of transportation that were not previously included in policy, including active transportation as well as traffic safety on schools. So I'm pleased to see that we're moving in a good direction, and we'll support the motion. Thank you.
All right. And I see a speakers list has already begun to form. I've got Chantel first and then Mark.
Right. I obviously will be supporting the motion. I helped as a policy committee member to draft this. I'm pretty proud of it. We worked really hard on this one and really hammered out a lot of the details, some of the sticking points. But I will say that the motion, the policy itself is called Policy 3.8, Transportation to and from School. So I'm being a little sassy here and saying that the motion doesn't include the full name of the policy, but I don't think that really matters per se. So we don't really need to do an amendment to the motion, do we? I don't think we do. It's just going out to consultation. Yeah. Okay, cool. Great. Mark, I see you jumping on, so if you want to clarify, that'd be great.
Yeah, we made the judgment call that we're changing the transportation policy, and it was the transportation. So good point. We just went with what we're changing rather than what we're changing it to. So I guess either way.
Right. That's a really good point, because transportation is the old name and transportation to and from school is maybe the new name. Maybe too many people will have very negative feelings about this title, but I think we're going to be safe on that one. But thank you. I will be supporting this motion, and I think just saying, I think it's well written. So
I think it is too. Mark Robinson.
Thank you, policy committee, for all your elbow grease. I think this is wonderful. I am speaking in favor of the motion. My only comment is we had a consultation, a consultant that looked at transportation a few months ago. We hired them, and I hope this can kind of integrate some of the information that we got from there somehow, somewhere. I'm just throwing that out there on the radar that we spend money on consultants. I would love to use some of that information. I think Mark has something coming up.
In the future, I believe that we'll be reporting in November on the outcome of that specific Randerson issue that the board directed. If I'm wrong about that, Pete is, sorry, one second. Karen has yelled at me to indicate that that is correct.
Wonderful. Thank you,
Wonderful.
Mark. And thank you, policy committee, and everyone involved in crafting this wonderful update. Thank you.
Wonderful. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Seeing none, is there anyone opposed to the recommendation? Yeah. Seeing none, passes unanimously. All right. So now we will move on to 8.6. Mark and Pete Sabo, our Executive Director of Planning and Operations, on the annual vandalism report.
Great, thank you, Chair. And I'm just going to jump on to say I'm very, very glad to see a stabilization in the costs with respect to vandalism, and I think that some of the additional cameras and working with the city and RCMP are having an impact. But otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Pete to go through the report, or at least to answer questions, because it is very, very, very thorough, as you can see.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walsh, and good evening, everybody. Yeah, I'm very pleased to present the report. As Mark has indicated, we have seen a general decline in vandalism. If you look at page 52, the statement is made, it is felt that the initiatives, including exterior cameras and increased security patrols at key schools, contributed to the decline in year-over-year vandalism, despite a costly start to the summer where there was a couple of break-ins in July. The video cameras have given us more in-depth information on vandalism activities and time. So for instance, if there is an activity at a school, we look at that activity and determine the time and the cause. And then we can look at targeting our active and passive measures at reducing vandalism at that school. And so we've had specific examples of that. And while it's difficult to quantify exactly how much of the reduction in vandalism is directly attributable to the presence of cameras, the preventative benefit is an important consideration. I'd also like to thank Paul Kingsbury and Kieran Singh for their work on security with respect to the district and their detailed work in tailoring the security response, as well as the cleanup activities of our emergency caretakers at schools. They are very flexible, adjusting their service real time to make sure that they're addressing the needs of the district. I'd also like to thank Mr. Brian Kingsley and his team, Brian Hackwood and his team of planners with respect to the installation of video systems. Also make mention in the report of the School Act requirement for review of the video systems. And so School Act Section 7401, the board is to review the efficacy of the cameras on an annual basis. And so we believe that this report provides that annual review as required by the School Act. That's a new item since last time. I believe I will, and we'd also like to point out that more work is being done with the community safety unit, the new unit that I think we spoke to with the city of Nanaimo. Paul's team continues to work closely with them, and they provide assistance in ensuring that we keep unwanted activity and have the assistance to move unwanted activities off of our school sites. I think I'll pause there and see if there's any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Pete at this point? Chantel.
Sorry, I think I'm coming in too early. So I think I'll perhaps.
Is it pertaining to the vandalism?
It's pertaining to the cost of the vandalism.
Put it out there now, and it might lead Pete into the next part of the report.
Okay. I'm sorry. I just want to say too that it's really great that I see that we are starting to find out how much custodians are actually spending on working on the vandalism. I think that's an eye-opening amount of money. You know, these little tiny bits of time really add up, and I think it's really great for us to start that you've started to do this, and that we'll be able to see that over time. I think that's really fantastic. And it was actually a budget question, because I do see here that vandalism costs are not don't have a specific line item in our budget, right? And when it comes to over $100,000, thank you, Mark, for coming on, because this question was really aimed at your department. I'm curious, why do we not have a line item? Should we have a line item? If you could kind of expand more on that, that would be really awesome, now or later.
Yeah, I mean, so the reality is that it is kind of part of the cost of doing business. And so it's always never really had a line item. So it's always been taken out of the operations budget of facilities in one way or the other. So it's written in a way that, you know, Pete might be asking for a line item, right, Pete? But but no, that's just how it's accounted for. And so, you know, the good thing is that if there's if we get that down to zero, facilities now has $100,000 more to, well, I guess it's $80,000 more to spend. If it goes up, then we might have to come to the board and say, hey, look, we need to invest from our surplus to kind of bump up that number, or change facilities budgets on an ongoing basis. What I will say though is that, you know, the camera work, some of those upgrades don't come from those budgets. We budget for that separately, and so that investment is hopefully creating savings that just gets to stay in facilities.
Pete, is your hand up, Pete?
Yes, if I might add, my apologies for the way it was written. I wasn't trying to point out the budget, but Mark did raise a good point, and it's more to point out that a reduction in vandalism puts more services in classrooms. That's kind of more how that was meant to be read. Thank you.
Yeah, and then one other internal conversation we're having, and frankly, it's probably not worth the effort, which is a sad thing to say, but as the cameras start to find the culprits, the question is are we going to start spending the effort to go use the Civil Resolution Tribunal to get our money back? We haven't yet to take that step, but we may well start taking that step, particularly if house insurance covers that if it's a young person.
Okay.
Really good point. Thank you for that. Thank you, Pete, and thank you, Mark, for that. That's facilities is doing a great job in trying to curb that really pesky problem. Thank you.
Okay. Not seeing anything, any other questions. I'm gonna, Pete, let you continue. Oh, is he gone? Okay. Was there anything else we wanted to go over to discuss on this topic? Are we good? Sorry. Okay. Oh, okay. I do want to say I do appreciate the report, and I think it's important that we do talk about this subject because it is something that has an impact on our operations. So, all right, Mark and Pete, now to talk about AP 522, public use of school buildings, grounds, and equipment. 8.7 this is.
Perfect. Thank you. And so here is another example of where we have an AP that significantly did not necessarily align with practices or even the requirements of the board. And so example that I will give is recommendation 15 of our long-range facilities plan says ensure that rental rates for facilities including childcare operate on a cost recovery basis at minimum. NLPS subsidizes user groups and rental groups. While certainly being a community partner is important, and many of the rental groups include families, NLPS has insufficient funding to maintain assets for school use, let alone external use. The outcome of this recommendation would be a review of the rates and a consultation process prior to any changes that would include recommendations for yearly adjustments due to inflation. So a couple of points here is we actually, when we went out to public tender for a request for information and qualification or interest in qualification for our new childcare sites, we actually started those at our costs. And our providers were fully aware and, you know, expressed concern that they'd like to pay less, but they understand it's the cost of maintaining facilities. No problem. It's all in place for the new providers. It's not necessarily in place, though, for many of our users, as well as actually our currently existing childcare providers. So we've been looking through that, and frankly, we've had some concerns since this AP has been published in the business committee from some of our childcare providers specifically. And I just want to acknowledge that right off the bat, that we are not going to be raising their rates to full, for-profit rates at this time. We do need some consultation with our previously existing providers before those rates are implemented, and we'll come back to the board to report out. But generally, and I'm going to leave it to Pete to talk a little bit about what alignment was done in redoing the AP and the adjustments to the finances. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that we've been having some internal debates about how best to open our facilities even more to the community coming out of COVID. And one of the things I just want to, it's a little bit separate from the AP, but I just want to acknowledge Pete and his team. They went and they looked at best practice, and we've been redoing our gym floors every summer, which is not necessarily required. And so what that does is it typically closes off the access to our public users, and we're going to be changing that practice. And so there's going to be additional access starting next summer. And in fact, it started this summer, it just started a little bit late. So for instance, we were able to make some revenue off of our site on Howard there at where the Tay-Texton project's going to build. And so we're going to continue to expand opportunities for our community. And I just want to acknowledge the facilities team. We had a long discussion about making that happen. I just want to acknowledge that. But Pete, if I could just get you to walk through the changes, and again, noting that with respect to the currently existing childcare providers that are not occupying our new builds, we will be reaching out to them to have an independent consultation prior to instituting any fee changes.
Thanks again, Mr. Walsh. And so I'll comment a little bit on the gym floors and trying to get more access into schools. So we have also been working with the assistant superintendent to look at specialty spaces in various high schools, et cetera, that may be interest. And we are continuing to work on expanding gyms that are available. So between the operations department and the rentals department, we are looking at potential facilities in the north, midtown, and south that we could look as a pilot to make available to try and assess the demand for that during the summer. There still will be some limitations on summer use in with respect to that. Just one of our initiatives. With respect to the key changes, if we look at page 87, just a few sort of housekeeping on top of. One of them is that NLPS no longer manages the Rotary Bowl. We don't own it. That's the City of Nanaimo's responsibility. Although we are of interest working with the city, and we now have the students in the portables at NDSS utilizing the washrooms in the Rotary Bowl change house. So those are closer, more accessible than going into the main school. Saves us also putting a washroom facility on the site. Items like Hammond Bay and Davis Road gyms are no longer half gyms. So we no longer have any half gyms in the district. So that's changed. Secondary school kitchens are only available for rental on a trial basis. With respect to the for-profit, we've raised the hourly rate, but we're looking at taking the one-time basic charge out. And so we're going to see how that goes. We've also increased the for-profit rate on for fields as well for those for that, and we've adjusted for the cannabis and vaping products in our regulations, and we've slightly increased the community rental of chairs and cartage costs due to increasing labor costs. We also plan to do some adjustments to our software, as the sheet indicates, to ensure that the for-profit rates are incorporated into the rental documents. And staff are pleased to report that we continue to recover from COVID, to work to give the community as much access as we can to our schools. And some of that community access comes at a cost. So, for example, some disruption to the school. We want to minimize the disruption to the school when we're renting during certain times, and sometimes that disruption ends up as an extra cost to the contract. And we want to make sure that the rentals are sustainable from a school's perspective, so that we're not disrupting school operations, and benefiting renters. We want to make sure we strike that balance. Staff continue to work on other items, such as a general rate increase, which is not included in the document. So we're still looking at at that and may come in the future with another AP adjustment for those basic rates. I think we haven't adjusted for cost of living since 2015 on the general rates. Yeah, I think I'll pause there and see if there's any questions.
Do we have any questions for Pete around this one, or Mark? Question from Jeff. For Tannen. Oh, sorry, Greg, I didn't see you. So I'll go to Jeff first, and then I'll come back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a question about the daycares. So the original 5 that came out, our employees are not cleaning them. So with these new rates that you're talking about, will you charge enough so that our workers will actually be doing that work? Just because it's created some labor relations issues that we're trying to work through.
See, Mr. Walsh has popped up. I'll see if he wants to lead this question, and I'm available to assist.
Yeah, so with respect to the new rates for the previously existing folks, we would be looking at a cost recovery model with respect to that. So certainly we would want to cost recover all of the cleaning costs, and so that will be taken into account, but the main focus will be changing it to make sure that we're actually able to maintain them. So if they're in a portable, they're, as an example, the portable's not melting away clean on the inside, but going out of being unusable in 20 years on the exterior.
Do you have a follow-up there, Jeff?
Kind of. I don't know if my question was answered. Because you said that because the recommendation from the long-range facility plan ensures that the rental rates for facilities, including childcare, operate on a cost recovery basis at a minimum. But we didn't do that with the first 5. So I guess I'm trying to get clarification if we're gonna, moving forward, are we going to be able, are our guys going to be cleaning those portables, I guess.
Oh, I see. I apologize. So certainly with the way they've been structured with respect to the license for the spaces, if the providers would like to contract our services, we absolutely will contract the services at a cost recovery basis, but we've given them that option.
Okay, I guess, can I have a follow-up? Sure. I guess, why do they have that option? There are buildings, they're on our land, we build them. I'm just lost as to why they would have the option when that should be falling under our workers.
I think maybe, Jeff, we should take this one to labor management rather than having a kind of a labor relations discussion at the public meeting. So why don't I attend the next labor management meeting? I'll ask that to be put into my calendar if that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. All right. Greg, I saw a question from you that I missed.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and through you to staff. Thanks for this. My question is also in relation to cost recovery in a different context. I'm just curious if, for example, a group wanted to rent some space on a weekend or an evening. These rates still seem fairly low when it comes to having to pay for custodial and someone to let you in the building and let you out and maybe stay there while you're in the building. So I just wondered if you could speak to a little bit about what that process looks like for a community group to physically get into one of our facilities. Like, I don't know, let's pick a multi-purpose room or a library or something, like not necessarily a gym, which is a little bit easier. And then, someone needs to clean up afterwards, someone needs to lock the building, and if you're only paying a min charge of $33.68, for example, just as one example in the AP, does that cover someone to get called in for that time? And it just seemed low. I just wanted to confirm with staff kind of what that looks like.
Yes, through the chair. So there are various additional charges on top of rentals. So for instance, if you're renting during the school day, the school is already heated. if you're renting on the weekend, when we go into night setback mode, there is a small charge for heat. There are additional charges for security, and there are additional charges for custodial services, which are provided by our custodians. And so, for example, somebody might want to come in and rent our gym on a weekend, and we would have to ensure that that gym was put back in shape for the school to use on Monday, and we would have a minimum 4-hour call out for that. If we have 5 or 6 or 7 rentals on the weekend, which we often have, then that 4-hour call out is spread across more rentals, therefore reducing the cost to the rental group. So there's also potentially call out to lock and arm and disarm the buildings, although we have been giving renters specific rental codes and keys, and they've been able to access buildings, disarm and leave and arm the building itself, thereby, reducing a security charge to have the building armed and disarmed. So so to wrap it up, and then there are potentially, as I've referenced before, some additional charge. Say, for instance, the school set up the gym with 100 chairs, and somebody wants to rent the facility in the middle of a string of Christmas concerts. Well, they would have to pay to take down the chairs, use the gym, and put the chairs back up so that the school wasn't inconvenienced and had to do that. And so therefore, there are some limitations to renting the gyms outside normal hours. And so we do try to work to minimize those costs and spread them over a number of renters. Thank you.
Follow up?
You have a follow-up, Greg?
Yeah, so I think, Pete, what I heard through you, Chair, is that the AP does provide for cost recovery, so we're not necessarily subsidizing different users and the cost associated with that.
Through the chair, staff believe that to be correct, and further work needs to be done with respect to ensuring that the base rates are kept up with the inflation costs, as well as aligning them with other municipality, with other rates for competitors, et cetera. And also, making sure that, it's very difficult to quantify the impact of a rental group on the weekend on the facility and how you attach a charge to it. Although we have been looking at when rental groups utilize rooms with specialty equipment and trying to determine, in some cases, schools have fundraised for that equipment and they want to see that equipment on a replacement program. And they want to see renters contribute to that replacement because the use of the equipment is providing wear and tear. So we're also considering those items.
Thank you very much. Can you add me back to the list, please, Tanya?
Yep.
Separate one.
I don't actually see any other questions, so I'm gonna let you just go, Greg.
Thank you, Chair. Through you again to staff. I'm just curious about the booking process related to the facilities and how community groups, sports organizations, and others can find out about what spaces are involved or available, what the rates are and how to book them. And secondly, rather than go about it by ourselves, is there any opportunity to work with, say, for example, the city of Nanaimo through their recreation program bookings for our spaces? I'm just throwing that out there as just wondering what processes we have in place, how people can access and find out information, and sort of what opportunities may exist.
We thank you, and through the chair, we do have a facilities rentals coordinator. That's a full-time position that mans a phone. She operates the software. She makes sure that all the needs of the rental groups are met, and she has a phone number, and anybody with any questions can contact facilities rentals, and she will ensure they get access to the software where they can see rental bookings, et cetera, if they have questions with respect to the rates and that. I can't speak to the details of the software at this time. I can report that back out at a future time. And I've lost the second question. If you wouldn't mind repeating it.
Sure. If he answered the first part, maybe I could just, as a follow-up, just ask a little bit more. I know we don't necessarily have the name of the software, and that's okay. But is this something that's available to the public on our website, or they have to phone facilities?
Yeah, ultimately the new software package Simple Mind was purchased so that we could have a better online access so that people could look at spaces, availabilities, etc., and do bookings through that system. Again, unfortunately, I can't speak to the details of how that's working at this time, but that's the intent of the software.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. With respect to the city of Nanaimo, we do continue to work with the city, Parks and Rec, and the city in general on initiatives. And with respect to space provision, we do work with them on city recreational programs for the summertime as well as during the school year. And we continue to work on those initiatives with respect to providing greater access to the community, be it directly through our department or through working with the city.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. All right. Are there any other comments or questions on this topic? Seeing none, I want to thank you so much, Pete, for your contributions tonight. And I'm going to move on to our last main item, 8.8, Mark Walsh, Secretary Treasurer, regarding the NDSS capacity update.
Great, thank you, Chair. And so this update is the kind of opposite of the Rutherford, where the board is asked to take some action. We've been getting emails, and I'm sure you have too, from the community about the status of the NDSS capacity issue and what we have done with respect to next steps in our research. And just wanted to bring back to the board that we have a couple of ideas, but they're not ready to come to the board as just at this time, at least not in a public setting. However, there is some good news in the sense that ND has slowed. You'll see that we have been able to drop the capacity by about 50 kids. And we do have building permits to be opening the additional portables. They're not open yet, but permits came a few weeks ago, and we're working to get them available for students. So we will be coming back with a more fulsome report. We just wanted the community to know that no, there's no decision on programming being recommended to the board. And again, we're hopeful that some of the other similar districts with similar circumstances that us have some interesting solutions that we're ready to report back on soon, just not at this meeting, but we just didn't want to leave it empty. So it's there. The report is there.
All right. Thank you very much. Any questions? Question from you, Mark. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Mark. I have a question first, I think, regarding the 50 student drop. Is that from effort on the district's part, or is that just where the stars aligned this year?
It's effort on the district's part. I would suggest it's a combination of less us limiting international students at the school, but unfortunately us denying access to late registration, like kids moving into the neighborhood after January. We did say to some of them that they had to go off to Barsby. Although I will say, but I think it was the grade 9 cohort at Barsby that's really full, might be the 8s. We actually fit a couple of them into ND for this kind of same space reason, but we did say no to some catchment kids, unfortunately at ND, that maybe in the past we wouldn't have, to try to address the capacity issue.
Thank you, Mark, and just thank you so much for that information. Just a comment regarding NDSS capacity. It's kind of what I suspected, because I do know that like the population isn't shrinking. So I would say thank you to Greg, actually, because Greg is taking this to Victoria for Advocacy Day. It's one of our top thing. And this is definitely something that's on the radar, is that if we didn't put the effort in to tell catchment kids you can't go because we're full, we would be over capacity and looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars for new portables and this and that above and beyond. plus breaking all sorts of programming. So I think it's really important that, and very grateful to Greg, to be honest, if I'm being honest, to take it to the board and get our input. So trustees like all of us could bring our input. I know Chantel had some really good ideas, Tanya and Naomi as well. Tom had some good things. But at the end of the day, this just speaks on how important it is to make sure that we have a new NDSS. And thank you, staff, for doing the dirty deed, I guess, to on our behalf to say, unfortunately, you know, we'd love to have you, but we're full. So hopefully we don't have to do that in the future. So thank you, Mark. Thank you, Tanya. And thank you, Greg.
All right, thank you, Mark. The one thing I would say, I was going to say something. I think that the fact that we have had to turn away some catchment kids is something that we need to make sure that we are continuing to communicate to the ministry and through our MLAs and all of the channels that we use, because it is time that we address that we really ramp up that pressure to try to get that funding that we need so we can move on NDSS. But we know that is our number one facilities priority. So, yeah. All right. I'm looking in my chat and I'm not seeing anybody else who might want to speak to this. So I'm going to move on. Item 9, there's no correspondence referred from the regular board meeting. I see no unfinished business and I see no new business. For information, thank you, Karen, there are no questions. For information, there is item 12.1, a budget and financial planning timeline. Now, trustees, you've had a chance to hopefully look at this when you went over your agendas for tonight. So I think that we can probably go through the chair if we have any questions about this. But I want to give our partner groups just the opportunity, if you have any questions about this document, to ask them now, or you can go through. We should have some other opportunities where if there are questions about this document that we can discuss them. I just want to, because sometimes these 4 information items get passed over and we don't talk about them, but I think this one's pretty important and it is only 7:40, so I'm just going to throw that out there. Any questions on the budget timeline document? All right, I'm not seeing any. So I'm now going to entertain a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting. Move to adjourn from Chantel. And seconded, I saw by Naomi. That was the one that popped up for me first. All right. Anyone opposed to adjournment tonight? All right. And we are adjourned at 7:42. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you all for your participation and have a wonderful week.